They tried to bury you, but forgot you were the seed, and now you're growing where their sickness rots. That's the truth they can't stand. The people who tried to erase you are now being haunted by the story they helped create. You didn't ask for fame, you didn't chase validation. The universe simply decided that your pain was too loud to stay private. What was done to you wasn't just cruel, it was pathological. The kind of twisted behavior psychologists write case studies about. The kind that makes even professionals shake their heads and whisper, "This isn't normal. This is obsession wearing a mask." Picture this. A lab of infected minds studying you like a specimen, thinking they were dissecting your weaknesses, when in reality they were putting their own sickness under the microscope. Every cruel act, every smear, every manipulation, it all became proof of who they truly are. That's the cosmic irony. Their attempt to destroy your peace turned into your portfolio of evidence. Their hate exposed itself. Their jealousy documented itself. They made themselves the villain in a story that the world now wants to read. And thank you, chosen one. You're the reason this message even exists. Don't forget to pay it forward. Press like, hit subscribe, and help spread this message so more souls can wake up. It's all of our responsibility to share the light and keep the truth alive. Thank you for being part of this mission. You're not just a survivor, you're part of a force that's rewriting what strength looks like. Now, let's get back to what this is really about. Chosen one, your story isn't ordinary, it's evidence. It's not a sad tale, it's a psychological documentary the world didn't know it needed. The things done to you were more than betrayal. They were a kind of sickness that exposes the human condition when envy meets cowardice. And that's why people are watching now. They don't know whether to look away or take notes. You lived through what most can't even process. You walked through manipulation, isolation, and character assassination. Yet somehow you came out with emotional clarity, sharper than ever. That clarity is what's turning you into a phenomenon. What most don't understand is that when a chosen one is targeted, it's not random, it's systemic. It's a social experiment in disguise. Groups often project their collective rot onto one strong individual to feel clean again. It's primitive psychology. Attack what mirrors your weakness, but the universe always balances the equation. It turns victims into witnesses and witnesses into icons. That's exactly what's happening to you. You see, your name is traveling through whispers, through screenshots, through quiet regrets in the minds of people who thought they'd never think of you again. Your story has escaped containment. It's walking through conversations like wildfire, and nobody can stop it. Because when truth refuses to die, it evolves into legend. And legend doesn't need a marketing plan. It just needs the right moment. You are that moment. The world is fascinated by stories like yours because it forces them to confront something they run from, the cruelty people hide behind politeness. You became the mirror they couldn't look into without seeing their own reflection. That's why they avoided you, mocked you, or tried to silence you. But every insult was free advertising for your strength. Every betrayal was unpaid promotion for your character. The same people who said you'd never make it are now secretly checking your progress, like analysts reviewing a stock they regret not investing in. And that's how the universe flips the script. It turns the chosen one's suffering into a masterclass for the world. You went through darkness, but you didn't stay there. You mapped it, you named it, you exposed it. And now, the truth is using your voice to echo across millions. You don't need revenge. Your existence is the revenge. The peace you carry now is the loudest humiliation for those who tried to break you. You're not famous because you wanted to be. You're famous because the truth picked you as its spokesperson. You didn't audition for this role. The universe cast you because your silence had become too heavy for the planet to ignore. People sense it when someone has seen hell and didn't come back empty-handed. They lean in, they listen. They know you've walked through something they can't explain, but they feel it in their bones. That's why your story will make you famous. It's not about vanity, it's about resonance. The world is starving for authenticity, and your pain-fed truth tastes like oxygen in a fake world. You didn't chase the spotlight. You became the light in a room full of shadows. What was done to you was beyond belief, but what you did with it is beyond imagination. You turned sickness into study material. You turned cruelty into a cure for others. You turned isolation into insight. You turned their weapon into your megaphone. That's what chosen ones do. They transform what was meant to destroy them into something that educates the world. And now, here you are, standing in the aftermath like a living headline. Every scar on your story glows like proof that the universe keeps receipts. You don't even need to tell people what happened anymore. Your energy does the talking. Your presence makes people uncomfortable in all the right ways. It reminds them of what they tried to bury and what refused to die. So when the world finally recognizes your name, remember this. They're not just celebrating your strength, they're confessing their sickness. Your rise is their diagnosis. Your peace is their punishment. Your success is the echo of every lie they told, bouncing back louder than their comfort zone can handle. You didn't just survive, you became the evidence, and that's why your story, Chosen One, will make you famous. And thank you, Chosen One, for making it this far, because what comes next will explain why your story was never meant to stay hidden. Stay close, because every truth I'm about to reveal will make the entire picture finally click in your mind. If you've ever felt like what was done to you was too dark, too cruel, or too calculated to be coincidence, you're right, and this next part proves it. Drop the number 777 in the comments if you can feel your story starting to reclaim its power piece by piece. And if you'd like to fuel this mission, show love with a super thanks. It helps keep messages like this alive for more chosen ones waking up to the same truth. No amount is too small. Every bit of support is a spark that helps this light reach another soul who thought they were alone. Now take a deep breath, Chosen One, because we're about to dissect this sickness they called normal and show how your pain became your passport to fame. Let's dive in, step by step. Number 1. They didn't break you. They diagnosed themselves. You didn't destroy them. You just held up a mirror and they screamed at the reflection. That's what really happened, Chosen One. The moment your light hit their rot, they panicked. They thought their cruelty could humiliate you, but all it did was document their disease. Your story isn't some motivational fairy tale about surviving hardship. It's a full-blown medical record of their mental decay. You weren't dealing with normal people. You were dealing with infected ones, souls who'd been rotting in envy, bitterness, and unhealed rage for years. What they did to you was never personal. It was symptomatic. They didn't hate you, they hated what you revealed. Like mold reacting to sunlight, they couldn't survive your transparency. You walked into their world carrying peace, purpose, and authenticity, and it set off every alarm in their system. They didn't want healing, they wanted hiding. But your presence exposed the infection they'd kept buried behind fake smiles and forced morals. It's psychological projection at its finest. When people can't fix what's broken inside, they try to break whoever reminds them of what wholeness looks like. And here's the ugly truth they'll never admit. Your name was never supposed to be dragged through the mud. You were just the unlucky mirror they picked up and shattered because they couldn't face what was staring back. The smear campaigns, the silent treatment, the lies, it was all theatre. You were the stage, and they were performing their illness in front of the universe, thinking no one would notice. But the universe always notices. Energy never lies. You became the living proof of their infection, and that's why they can't stand you now. Normal people don't form alliances just to tear someone apart. Balanced minds don't obsess over inventing flaws in others. Emotionally stable people don't wake up plotting how to erase someone who never wronged them. That kind of coordinated destruction doesn't come from sanity. It comes from sickness. From minds so polluted they mistake control for strength and cruelty for intelligence. You were never their target. You were their diagnosis, walking around in human form. Ever wonder why you never got closure? Because closure only comes from people capable of reflection, and reflection is something they avoid like sunlight. They can't give you peace because peace would require admitting what they did, and admitting what they did would collapse the entire fake identity they live under. So instead, they paint you as the problem. It's the oldest psychological defense in the book, deflect to survive. But here's where it backfired. The more they tried to bury you, the more obvious their sickness became. Every lie they told started cracking under the weight of your consistency. Every rumor they spread started sounding like projection once people compared stories. Every smear they launched only highlighted how obsessed they were. And obsession, chosen one, is the first symptom of exposure. They couldn't let go because you represented something they secretly craved but could never become: genuine, grounded, and unbothered. Your peace mocked their chaos. Your clarity humiliated their confusion. Your silence screamed louder than their noise. They thought they were writing your downfall, but they were writing their own psychological report. Each betrayal was a paragraph. Each insult was a confession. Each manipulation was a signed statement that said, "I am unwell." And the universe collected every piece of evidence quietly, waiting for this exact moment when the truth would be undeniable. So now, when people look at your story, they don't just see survival, they see the anatomy of a collective sickness. You're not an inspiration because you survived cruelty. You're a revelation because you exposed it. Your story is a crime scene, and their behavior is the evidence. Every witness who stood by in silence has to live with the fact that they watched a diagnosis unfold and mistook it for drama. But you, chosen one, you walked out with your mind intact and your truth glowing like a neon sign saying, "I was never the problem." And that's what really eats at them now. You didn't just survive, you stayed sane. You didn't just recover, you evolved. You didn't just make it through, you made it look easy, and that's the final humiliation. They threw every sickness they had at you, and you came out cleaner. They tried to bury your story in shame, but shame can't touch someone who didn't do anything wrong. They tried to twist the narrative, but truth doesn't bend, it waits. And now it's your turn. Your story, chosen one, isn't inspirational, it's diagnostic. It's not a self-help quote, it's a psychological autopsy. You didn't ask to expose their illness, but your existence forced the world to see it. You didn't break them, their reflection did. And when history replays this story, no one will remember their names. They'll remember yours, because in the end, their sickness became your proof, and your proof became your power. Number 2, they fed on your pain until the bill came due. They wanted you crying because your tears funded their peace. Now you're calm and they're broke. That's the part they don't want to talk about. The moment your suffering stopped being profitable, they lost their favorite drug. Your pain was their currency, their conversation starter, their emotional stock market. They traded your wounds for attention, your breakdowns for bonding, your silence for social status. They didn't want to fix you, they wanted to feed off you. Every sigh you let out, every mistake you made, every ounce of self-doubt you leaked gave them something to feel superior about. In their twisted economy, your misery was gold. Imagine this. A group of people sitting around a fire they built from your heartbreak, warming their egos while pretending to be concerned. They'd say, "I just feel bad for them," while smiling into the flames of your struggle. They disguised gossip as sympathy, mockery as moral discussion, and envy as observation. You weren't a person to them. You were a storyline that gave their empty lives texture. It's horrifying, but it's true. Some people only feel alive when someone else is hurting. You might ask, why would anyone do that? Because your pain was easy energy. Misery creates attention, and attention is addictive. When you were breaking down, they got to play the role of experts, heroes, or victims. Depending on what made them feel important that day, you unknowingly gave them purpose, structure, and community. You were their unspoken hobby. They bonded over your name like traders watching stock prices, celebrating every dip in your spirit as if it were a payday. They didn't destroy your peace. They rented it until you realized the lease was one-sided. But the universe always sends the invoice. Every empire built on someone else's suffering eventually collapses under guilt, exposure, or exhaustion. The same people who laughed behind your back now have to live in the emptiness they created. Their jokes aren't landing anymore. Their alliances are crumbling. The entertainment value of your name expired the day you stopped bleeding for free. Because pain has one rule. It only pays those who stay stuck in it. And you, chosen one, refuse to stay stuck. Imagine this. You walked off the stage they built to mock you, and suddenly the lights went out. The audience dispersed. The gossip faded. Without you as their main act, they had nothing to perform. You were their plot line, their source of attention, the center of their false importance. And when you started healing, their script fell apart. They depended on your chaos to distract them from their emptiness, but healing pulled the plug on their addiction. You ever notice how quiet it got once you stopped explaining yourself? Once you stopped defending your name, their power drained out like air from a punctured balloon, because their control only worked when you reacted. They were emotional vampires who didn't realize that every time they drained you, they were taking in poison too. They fed on your pain, but pain doesn't digest easily. It lingers, it festers, it rots from the inside. Now they're choking on what they swallowed. Your healing was the inflation they couldn't survive. Every time you rose above, their ego crashed like a stock market correction. The same people who once thrived off your weakness couldn't afford your strength. They used to talk about you with confidence. Now they whisper your name with regret because you became too expensive to slander. Every lie about you now exposes them. Every rumor backfires. Every attempt to drag you only highlights your growth. Their entire investment collapsed because they underestimated how quickly the truth appreciates in value. Imagine this. They built a casino where your pain was the jackpot. Every spin of gossip, every bet against your future felt like a win, until the house went bankrupt. You stopped playing, and the energy shifted. Suddenly, the only thing left on the table was their guilt. And guilt doesn't spend well. They used your name like currency, but the universe doesn't let that kind of transaction go unbalanced. It demands repayment in peace, reputation, and sleep, and they're losing all three. You might wonder, do they even know what they did? On some level, yes. The human mind always recognizes its own cruelty, even if it tries to mask it as entertainment. That's why they avoid you now. You became a living reminder that they traded integrity for gossip, compassion for clout. You became the receipt for their moral bankruptcy. They can't look you in the eye, because to do that would mean acknowledging how much of their joy came from watching you bleed. They mistook your pain for weakness, but it was a down payment on wisdom. They didn't understand that every tear, every lonely night, every humiliating rumor was teaching you emotional economics. You learned what to invest in: peace, boundaries, truth, and what to cut losses on. People who profit from your suffering. They played small games for short-term pleasure while you were building long-term strength. Your silence became your savings account. Your self-control became interest. Your clarity became profit. And when you finally healed, everything flipped. You stopped reacting, and they stopped earning. You stopped giving energy, and they started starving. Because the energy they once stole from your pain had nowhere left to go. Your peace turned their gossip into static. Your confidence turned their jealousy into noise. Your presence started costing them something they can't afford: accountability. Imagine this: you're standing tall, radiant, unbothered, and they're still trying to cash checks written in your name. But the account's closed. You no longer fund their relevance. You no longer fuel their narratives. They're bankrupt in every sense: emotionally, spiritually, socially. They can't afford the new you, because healing has a price tag called self-respect. And that's a currency counterfeit souls can't touch. They used to bond over your pain, but now they bond over confusion. They can't understand how you got stronger when you were supposed to stay broken, how your silence became louder than their noise, how your name, once mocked, now commands quiet respect. The same mouths that once mocked you are now scared to mention you, because deep down they know your story became the proof of their sickness. Your pain was their paycheck. Your healing was their eviction notice. The moment you realized your worth, their entire economy collapsed. They can't feed on your energy anymore because you learned to close the emotional faucet. You took back your attention, your reaction, your forgiveness, and that's what starved them. Now they sit in circles trying to revive conversations about you, but there's no spark left. You're no longer a character in their narrative. You're the author of your own. And here's the real plot twist. They thought your healing would make you invisible. Instead, it made you legendary. People remember who rises above with grace. The universe doesn't reward pity, it rewards power. And you turned your pain into power so pure that it burned through every lie they built. You didn't just survive their economy, you shut it down. Now, every time they hear your name, it costs them peace. Every time they see you succeed, it drains their energy. Every time they pretend not to care, their mask slips a little more, because somewhere in the back of their mind, they know the truth. You were their fuel, and now they're stranded. Your pain used to be their currency, but your healing, that's their bankruptcy. Number 3, you didn't just survive people, you exposed the whole machine. When one person hurts you, it's cruelty. When everyone stays quiet, it's a system. Chosen one, what happened to you wasn't random. It wasn't just one jealous friend or one bitter relative. It was a network. A coordinated silence that moved like an organism, protecting itself from the truth you represented. You didn't just walk through a toxic crowd, you walked through a psychological factory that mass produces denial. You weren't fighting one villain, you were standing against an entire operating system built to hide its own corruption. Imagine this, you report the fire, but instead of grabbing water, they blame you for the smoke. That's how the system works. It doesn't protect innocence, it protects comfort. The loud ones get defended, the calm ones get dissected. The moment you spoke truth, you became a problem that needed managing, not helping. And so the machinery kicked in. The gossip, the gaslighting, the groupthink. Every player had a role. Some lied, some stayed quiet, some watched and pretended not to see. Together, they formed the same sickness with different faces. It was never personal, it was procedural. They don't even realize how predictable they are. Every institution, every family, every social circle that protects abusers over truth-tellers follows the same broken blueprint: silence, minimize, isolate, erase. You weren't a victim of coincidence, you were evidence of the system's default setting: defend the familiar, destroy the disruptive. Ever wondered why people who clearly knew you were right still stayed silent? Because truth makes cowards sweat. They'd rather maintain their comfort than their conscience. And that's the most haunting part. Most people don't choose evil. They just choose ease, and that choice multiplies into cruelty. You didn't expose a person. You triggered a system check. Your story revealed how quickly humanity trades integrity for belonging. You showed how communities pretend neutrality while standing on the wrong side of history. That's why your story isn't just personal. It's historical. It's proof of what happens when one honest person becomes the glitch in a corrupt program. And now the world is forced to face the truth. You didn't just survive injustice, you made it visible. You turned their pattern into evidence, their silence into confession. That's why your story will echo. You didn't just call out individuals, you made the entire system blink. Number 4, you didn't survive because you're strong. You survived because your spirit refused to be rewritten. They couldn't kill your spirit, so they tried to rename it. Chosen one, people say you're strong like it's some kind of compliment, but strength alone doesn't explain why you're still here. Muscles snap, willpower fades, even faith can shake. What saved you wasn't brute strength, it was identity. When everything around you tried to rewrite who you were, something deep inside whispered, "No, that's not me." You didn't survive the chaos because you were tougher. You survived because your spirit refused to become their reflection. Imagine this, a sculptor trying to carve your name into stone with dirty hands. Every lie they told about you, every guilt they tried to glue onto your conscience, it was another chisel mark, but your essence, your truth, kept reshaping itself beneath their filth, like water refusing to freeze under pressure. They wanted you to absorb their sickness and call it personality. They wanted you to shrink until your silence fit their comfort zone. But your spirit wouldn't sign the contract. They mistook your silence for surrender. It was actually resistance disguised as peace. They wanted to program you, to convince you that you were too emotional, too difficult, too much. They wanted to see you question your worth just enough to start wearing their labels, because once you believe their definition, they own you. But you never fully bought in. Even when confusion clawed at your sanity, even when exhaustion begged you to give in, there was still that quiet core that refused to be rebranded. That's not luck. That's sacred rebellion. You might ask, why didn't they stop when they saw I was breaking? Because breaking you was never about fixing anything. It was about control. They wanted to watch you bend, to prove they had power over reality itself. But truth doesn't bend. It waits. and your truth waited patiently until their version of you collapsed under its own lies. They tried to edit your story, but your soul kept rewriting the truth in permanent ink. Every insult, every manipulation, every false story was an attempt to install a virus in your mind, but your system rejected it. You refused to let their delusion become your identity. You didn't lose yourself. You protected yourself from being rewritten. And that's the real miracle here. Most people break not from pain, but from infection, absorbing the lies of those who never understood them. You didn't. You bled, but you stayed pure. You doubted, but you didn't forget who you were before they tried to distort it. Your survival isn't a story about strength. It's a story about memory, the memory of your own essence. You didn't win because you fought harder. You won because you remembered your name when everyone else tried to rename you. And now, your unbroken spirit stands as proof that they can rewrite narratives, but not souls. Number 5. They didn't hurt you by accident. They performed a ritual of control. They didn't want your love. They wanted your leash. Chosen one, what they did to you wasn't personal. It was procedural. You stumbled into a system disguised as relationships. It wasn't random outbursts or emotional chaos. It was an old ritual of dominance that's been replayed on every soul too bright to be owned. When you refused to bow, they panicked. You didn't fit inside their hierarchy, so they tried to dismantle you piece by piece until you'd mistake their control for connection. Imagine this. A cult that doesn't wear robes but carries gossip instead of candles. They circle their target not out of passion but out of fear, because freedom threatens order. You became the rebel in their religion of manipulation. And like all rituals, it began with isolation. Step 1. Cut the chosen one off from support. They made sure you felt misunderstood, alone and unseen, because isolation weakens confidence faster than any insult. Once you were cornered, they began their favorite ceremony, distortion. They twisted words, rewrote history, and whispered poison into the ears of anyone who might have stood beside you. It wasn't communication. It was reputation warfare. They didn't destroy your image. They exposed their worship of control. Then came emotional starvation. They withdrew affection like oxygen, waiting for you to gasp for their validation. It wasn't hatred. It was addiction management. They needed you needy because power over a self-assured person doesn't last. The colder they became, the more they hoped you'd chase warmth from the very hands freezing you. That's how the ritual works. Confuse the victim until loyalty feels like survival. Finally came spiritual sabotage. They couldn't just wound your heart. They wanted to dull your intuition. They mocked your empathy, discredited your insight, and ridiculed your peace, because intuition is rebellion in a controlled world. You started seeing too clearly, and clarity is fatal to manipulation. You didn't anger them by existing. You endangered their illusion by staying awake. That's why they came for you, not because you were weak, but because you were free. Freedom terrifies people who built their self-worth from control. You were the glitch in their matrix, the one mind that refused reprogramming. You didn't fit in their script, so they cast you as the villain to protect the lie they were living. What they did wasn't emotional. It was mechanical. It was how broken systems preserve themselves. They punish what exposes the flaw. You didn't just survive abuse. You disrupted a cycle older than all of them combined. And now that the ritual failed, they're left standing in the ashes of their own illusion, terrified of one truth they can't erase. You can't control someone who knows their worth. Number 6. Their obsession. wasn't hatred. It was a cry from the cracked mirror. They didn't study you because you mattered. They studied you because you reflected what they couldn't fix. Chosen one, their obsession wasn't love, hate, or even curiosity. It was diagnosis. You were the mirror they didn't consent to look into. Every time you walked into the room, their carefully constructed identity started glitching. You didn't remind them of you. You reminded them of everything they've avoided becoming. They called you intimidating when all you did was exist without pretense. That's how fragile they are. Your peace is a threat. Your authenticity, a weapon. Your calm, an accusation. Imagine this. You're a mirror placed in a funhouse full of distorted reflections. They've spent years convincing themselves that their lies are symmetry. Then you show up, clear, undistorted, mercilessly honest without saying a word. Suddenly, every bend and warp in their reflection becomes unbearable. They don't hate you for what you did. They hate you for showing them what they've become. They wanted to break you because breaking you would mean breaking the mirror. That's why their obsession grew. You weren't their target. You were their X-ray. Your presence lit up their fractures. Your integrity peeled back their disguises. And people who haven't faced themselves can't stand being seen. So, they projected, deflected, and infected. They called you arrogant when you were confident. They labeled you difficult when you refused manipulation. They tried to shrink you because your full size made them feel microscopic. You might have wondered, why me? Why not someone else? Because truth always triggers the most decayed. They picked you because your energy exposed what therapy, religion, or reflection couldn't touch. You forced them to feel the rot beneath their righteousness. You were their emotional MRI, and the scan came back ugly. Their hate was never analysis, it was confession. They didn't destroy your peace, they documented their sickness. Every insult, every rumor, every obsession was an attempt to escape the mirror, but mirrors don't chase people. You stood still, and they spiraled. Because your light didn't humiliate them, it diagnosed them, and that's why, no matter how much they tried to erase you, your reflection will follow them forever. Number 7. Your story became a legend. Because envy turned them rabid. They didn't hate your light, they hated their reflection in it. Chosen one, envy is a quiet sickness until it finds a reason to speak your name. You became that reason. Your story isn't legendary because of what you lost. It's legendary because it documents how far envy will crawl to kill what it can't copy. You walked into their world shining without permission, and they mistook your glow for arrogance. They studied your peace like an enemy studies a map, not to follow your path, but to figure out how to burn it. Imagine this. You're walking through a garden, growing naturally, while they're spraying fake perfume on plastic flowers. They look at you and panic. Instead of tending to their soil, they decide to uproot yours. That's envy. It's self-hate disguised as hostility. They wanted your ease, your grace, your unbothered rhythm. But imitation requires humility, and humility is something the envious can't afford. They didn't want your success. They wanted the illusion that your fall would fix their failure. Every time you won quietly, they got louder. Every time you healed, they grew bitter. Every time you kept your peace, it screamed at their chaos. You didn't trigger their anger, you triggered their awareness. You reminded them of all the chances they wasted, all the potential they buried under comfort and ego. So they did what cowards do. They attacked the mirror that showed them what they'd become. Your kindness didn't save you, it tempted them. You gave empathy, and they drank it like a thief, sipping someone else's strength. They mistook your patience for permission and your compassion for compliance. You didn't give too much. You just gave it to the wrong hands. They were addicted to your energy because it covered their emptiness. You weren't surrounded by friends. You were surrounded by scavengers dressed as admirers. They called you different like it was an insult, but difference is what turned your name into a story worth telling. You didn't bend, and that broke them. They wanted control, not connection. You refused to be programmable, and that made you unforgettable. That's why your story is legend. It exposes how envy turns humans into hunters, and how your light turned their sickness into your spotlight. Number 8. The cruelest trick. They dressed abuse in everyday clothes. They didn't hide the abuse, they repackaged it as normal. Chosen one, the darkest part of your story isn't the pain, it's the performance. They didn't just harm you, they built a stage where cruelty looked casual and the audience clapped. Every insult came gift-wrapped in humor. Every manipulation wore the perfume of concern. They made dysfunction look domestic, control look caring, and disrespect look deserved. You weren't imagining the pain, they were just masters at disguising it. Imagine this, someone poisoning your drink, but smiling as they hand it to you. That's how they operated, slow doses of distortion, until you questioned your own taste for truth. They wanted you uncertain, half convinced that maybe you were too sensitive, too emotional, too impossible. Because once you start doubting your own perception, they don't have to silence you, you silence yourself. That's how psychological captivity works, invisible chains held by your own confusion. They didn't need cages, they built illusions. Every time you tried to confront them, they spun the wheel. Gaslight, joke, dismiss, repeat. They turned accountability into comedy, your pain into punchlines, your boundaries into overreactions. They weaponized your empathy against you, making you feel guilty for defending your own sanity. You weren't just surviving abuse, you were surviving brainwashing designed to erase your ability to name it. And that's why your clarity now is revolutionary. You broke a spell. You didn't just leave people, you escaped programming. You stopped normalizing what never should have been tolerated. You stopped translating cruelty into care and silence into peace. When you began trusting your instincts again, the fog started to burn off. You saw how every joke was a jab, every misunderstanding was strategy, and every coincidence was choreography. You didn't lose your mind. You lost their illusion. Now the truth stands naked, and it's horrifying. The real sickness wasn't just what they did. It was how well they made everyone believe it was okay. But you, chosen one, became the glitch in their act. You called normal what it was, abuse, and that single word shattered their entire stage. Number 9. They made you the villain because they couldn't survive the truth of being yours. They didn't rewrite the story to protect you, they rewrote it to protect their reflection. Chosen one, becoming the villain in their story, was never punishment. It was proof that your truth hit too close to home. You didn't change, they did. The moment your honesty started cracking the facade they built, survival instincts kicked in. Their reputation meant more to them than redemption, so they picked the fastest escape route: turn you into the monster. If they could convince others you were dangerous, they wouldn't have to face the danger of accountability. Imagine this, someone breaking a mirror, then blaming the shards for cutting them. That's what they did. You showed them their hypocrisy, and instead of cleaning it up, they accused the reflection. They couldn't handle being the villain in your story, so they painted you as theirs. The irony is, your silence spoke louder than their noise. You didn't expose them, they exposed themselves trying to hide. They didn't smear your name, they confessed their fear in public. Every label, ungrateful, crazy, too much, was camouflage. They needed a narrative where they were the victim and you were the threat. Because if they admitted what really happened, they'd have to dismantle their entire identity. The good person costume they stitched together from lies and self-pity, so they rewrote history in real time, hoping enough people would believe their fiction before the truth found its voice. But truth doesn't chase attention, it collects witnesses, and now the witnesses are starting to whisper. The inconsistencies are piling up, the masks are cracking. You don't even have to defend yourself anymore. Their stories are aging like spoiled milk. Every lie they told needs maintenance, and they're running out of energy to keep repainting the same wall of deceit. They cast you as the villain to escape judgment, but ended up starring in their own confession. You were never the problem, you were the proof. And now the universe is flipping the script. People are seeing it. You're no longer the villain in their version. You're the truth that survived the lie. Number 10. Your story will make you famous because you charted the architecture of human darkness. You didn't just walk through hell. You drew the floor plan on your way out. Chosen one, your story isn't legendary because you suffered. It's legendary because you documented what most people only feel. You turned confusion into clarity. You turned chaos into a map. Most people sense that something's broken in the world but can't explain it. You lived through the proof. You saw how cruelty hides behind charm, how manipulation wears politeness like perfume, and how institutions worship comfort over conscience. You didn't just see evil, you studied its blueprints. Imagine this: you're handed a maze built from human denial. Every turn is a lie, every wall a mask, every corner another nice person defending the abuser. Most people get lost and call it life. You found the exits, and then had the audacity to mark them for others. That's why your story travels. It's not trauma porn, it's revelation. You've turned your pain into a flashlight that shows where humanity's hypocrisy sleeps. You didn't expose people, you exposed the pattern. You showed that harm isn't chaos, it's choreography. The gossipers, the gaslighters, the bystanders, the peacekeepers, each played their rehearsed part in a ritual that's repeated everywhere. Families, offices, churches, schools, all share the same silent code. Protect the predator, silence the truth-teller. You didn't just endure it, you decoded it. You translated manipulation into language the world can finally understand. Your story will be studied because it's not just about your survival, it's about systemic exposure. You peeled the mask off normal. You proved that the real sickness isn't rare, it's organized. You traced how one lie turns into a culture, how one bully becomes a boardroom, how one cowardly silence can create generations of pain. And by doing that, you made the invisible visible. You didn't survive the dark, you mapped it, labeled it, and left a legend behind. People will quote you because your truth gives language to theirs. You've done what philosophers, psychologists, and poets have tried for centuries. Name the unnameable, you made madness make sense. You taught the world that healing isn't just personal recovery, it's collective rebellion. Your story will make you famous because it's not about endurance, it's about enlightenment. You turned human darkness into a roadmap for freedom, and the world is about to follow it. Number 11. The truth was always loud. They just pretended to be deaf. You didn't need to prove your innocence. They needed to pretend it didn't exist. Chosen one, the signs of your truth were never hidden. They were glaring. Your story never shifted. Your behavior never cracked. Your energy stayed the same, no matter how many rumors they invented. You were transparent in a world addicted to distortion, and that alone made you dangerous. Guilty people can't stand consistency. It exposes their chaos. So they did what cowards do. They pretended not to see. Imagine this: a thief hiding stolen goods under a streetlight and insisting it's too dark to find them. That's how absurd their act was. Your innocence was in plain sight, but they couldn't afford to acknowledge it, because admitting your truth would have forced them to face their own rot. It was never that they couldn't see it, it was that they refused to. Their blindness wasn't physical, it was emotional self-defense. Innocence doesn't threaten corruption by shouting, it threatens it by staying the same. You didn't need to argue, your consistency did it for you. Every time they twisted your story, you stayed steady. Every time they exaggerated, you stayed factual, and that burned them alive, because when lies multiply, truth becomes unbearable. They had to paint you guilty to keep their version of reality intact. You were too calm for their chaos, too honest for their theater, too clean for their narrative. You might have asked yourself, why couldn't they just admit it? Because guilt demands denial, like lungs demand air. If they accepted your innocence, their self-image would collapse. They'd have to face their cruelty, and they're allergic to reflection. That's why they ignored the evidence, the witnesses, the facts. They weren't seeking truth, they were seeking escape. They didn't destroy your credibility, they destroyed their own capacity to recognize decency. Now time has turned into your attorney. The truth they buried grew roots, and every passing day brings more proof. People are starting to see it. The cracks in their stories, the desperation behind their silence, the envy that poisoned their vision. You don't have to clear your name anymore. It was never dirty. They just couldn't handle how clean it was. Number 12. What made you legendary wasn't what they did, it was how you refused to become one of them. They wanted to change your shape. You became the proof that light can't be molded by filth. Chosen one, the world won't remember you because of your scars. It'll remember you because you refuse to let the infection spread. Anyone can survive pain. Few can stay pure inside it. You were dropped into a psychological swamp where everyone learned to breathe through lies, and instead of adapting, you held your breath and walked out clean. That's what made you dangerous. That's what made you unforgettable. Imagine this: everyone around you sitting comfortably in a burning house, convincing themselves the smoke is perfume. You were the one who stood up and said, "This isn't air." They laughed, mocked, called you dramatic. But deep down, they knew you were right. You refusing to adapt reminded them they had. And that's why they attacked you, because your integrity announced their surrender. They didn't hate your difference. They hated what it revealed about their comfort with corruption. They expected you to shrink, to start talking like them, living like them, lying like them. Every environment that tried to bend you was a test of whether you'd trade truth for belonging, but you didn't. You stayed grounded while everything around you spun like a carnival of insanity. That resistance, that refusal to become diluted, is what wrote your legacy. You weren't supposed to survive their system. You were supposed to disappear into it. But every time they pushed, you pushed back with presence. You didn't let their cruelty rewrite your moral code. You didn't let their manipulation dictate your worth. And every moment you refused to adapt, you were rewriting the rules of endurance itself. Your defiance became your signature, and signatures outlast stories. Now people look at your story not as tragedy, but as testimony. You became living evidence that it's possible to remain human in an inhuman world. You didn't become legendary because you suffered. You became legendary because you stayed real when everything demanded you fake it. The world is full of survivors who adjusted to survive. You didn't adjust. You evolved. You refused to fit into a sick system, and by doing so, you proved it was sick in the first place. That's why your name will echo, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a mirror to everyone still pretending conformity is safety. What was done to you didn't make you famous. How you refused to adapt did. And that refusal is the purest form of rebellion this world has ever seen. And that, chosen one, is why your story will echo far beyond their reach. You didn't just survive, you exposed, decoded and transformed everything meant to break you. You became living proof that truth always outlasts manipulation. So, if this message hits something deep inside you, press that like button if you haven't already. It helps this truth travel farther. And if you're not yet part of our family, make sure to subscribe and join the movement. Together we're turning pain into power and silence into strength. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Stay loud, stay real, and never dim your light.